5:30, so time we started. Welcome to tonight's council meeting. Lovely to see people in the gallery, as always, and great to see a full house. We have these today. Can I just remind you to please put your mobile phones to silent, turn them off, and can I remind members that if you have interest, either general or material, please declare that before the item comes up agenda. And I should also say welcome to the people that are watching online. So could we please stand for the service acknowledgement? Yeah. City of Victor Harbour acknowledges the Ramangerian custodians, acknowledge their deep connection to country, pay our respect and emerging. This respect is extended to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander.
City of Victor Harbour is committed to diversity, equity and inclusion. We respect people of all ages, abilities, genders, sexualities, religions, backgrounds, culture.
We acknowledge the brave individuals who have served and continue to serve our nation. We remember those who have lost their lives and paid the ultimate sacrifice to our country.
Mighty God, we ask you to bless this council and allow it to be an agent of change to the people of this city and direct and prosper its deliberations to the honouring of your welfare of the people.
Please be seated. We don't have any apologies tonight, and there are no items adjourned or lying on the table, so we move straight into the minutes of the previous meeting. The recommendation is that those minutes of the meeting held on the 28th of January be confirmed as true and accurate. I want to move that way, Councillor Mann. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Does anybody have any questions about the minutes? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you very much. The minutes of the special council meeting being the 10th of February. Would somebody like to move that those minutes are confirmed as true and accurate? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Seconding, please. Thank you, Councillor Schiller. Does anybody have any questions about the special council meeting? No. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you very much. There are no deputations, there are no questions from the gallery, and there are no petitions. So we move on to the outstanding resolutions for February. The recommendation is that council receive and note the report. Somebody like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Schofield, and seconding that, please. Thank you, Councillor Burns. Do either of you want to speak to that or have any questions about the report? Councillor Burns? Does anybody have any questions about the outstanding resolutions? Nick?
Just wanted to ask if the University City project should be included. Items. That's not appropriate.
I'll pass that one over to the CEO.
It should actually be on there, but I think we've also incorporated it into coming back to council as part of a budget bid. So it is on that listing to come back.
Councillor Kemp?
Yes, page 14 of the agenda, talk about the Encounter Bikeway realignment council boundary connection. Just chasing up, have we got the report back from Alexandria Council where they want the connection to be made on the boundary, and where does Victor Harbour sit at the moment? What's the time frame forward?
Through the Mayor, Jody may wish to add to that. So there is an update in the agenda under our KPI report. So council has $35,000 allocation. We've also received a $20,000 grant for the design works, but no, we have not received any information from Alexandrina. They haven't actually budgeted for any design works in their budget. And what we're possibly looking to do is whip that project to next financial year, because it makes sense to obviously do it in conjunction with Alexandrina Council. We are still in discussions with them, but I think she said they've covered it. So that's where we're currently at.
Follow-up question with what type of workshops we'll be conducting and when, to look at exactly where we go run the encounter bikeway, because there are 3 different options which is open to council to approve.
Yeah, again, once we actually look at that piece of work in conjunction with Alexandrina Council, we would obviously need to hold a number of workshops and probably joint workshops around that piece of work. But as to the detail of them, I don't know at this stage.
Are there any further questions in relation to the outstanding resolutions? In that case, I'll put the recommendation to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The final representation review report from council. I would look for a mover for recommendation 1. Councillor Henderson, thank you. Do I have a seconder for recommendation 1? Thank you, Councillor Quinton. Would either of you like to speak to it? Councillor Henderson.
No, I don't think any more discussion is necessary. We've discussed this ad infinitum already.
Councillor Quinton? No. Does anybody want to say anything? No, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you.
I call the division, please.
All those in favour, please stand. That's Councillor Mann, Councillor Mackenzie and Councillor Burns. Councillor Schiller, Councillor Quinton, Councillor Schofield and Councillor Henderson. Against is Councillor Koremba and Councillor Kemp. That is carried. The other 2 recommendations I'm happy to do on block if somebody wanted to move them on block. Thank you, Councillor Schofield, and seconding Councillor Henderson. Do either of you want to speak to those 2 recommendations? Councillor Henderson, Schofield.
Excuse me. Look, I will speak to recommendation C, that the council retains its existing no wood structure.
Sorry, Councillor Schofield. With that recommendation 1 has been done. We're looking at 2 and 3.
Sorry about that. No, I don't have any more to say on either of those. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody want to speak to recommendation 2 or 3? In that case, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move to 9.3, the National General Assembly. I'm happy to do recommendation 1, 2 and 3 on block. And I also have a conflict of interest. So what I might actually do, and I think it's a material conflict of interest, so I might request if the Deputy Mayor can come up here, I'll help you up here, Angela, to do this recommendation.
I'd like to raise a point of order.
What is your point of order?
I think we're moving out of meeting procedures because it has been put to the floor. There's two options available for recommendation that has been put. We've only put one, which the mayor decided to.
It's okay. We will take them one at a time. So first recommendation for recommendation 1, do I have a mover? And if you can just audibly indicate that you are the mover in your name.
I'll move that, councillor Henderson.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
I'll second that, councillor Mann.
Thank you. Now, do either of you have anything to add to the debate?
No, not for me.
No.
Any others that would like to contribute to the debate?
Councillor Kemp.
And councillor Burns.
All right. Councillor Kemp?
I disagree with this recommendation because I think it's for the cost to the council and to the community. We are sending the CEO anyway. It's automatically the CEO attends. And I think it's in the best interest of the council that we have one representative there and the CEO who manages the workload and the staff and the budget on behalf of the elected members and the community. I think it's only prudent that we only send one person.
Right. Councillor Burns, would you like to add?
Yes. Normally I'm supportive of where the CEO or the mayor attend various conferences on behalf of the City of Victor Harbor and elected members. In this case, it's a meeting for the Local Government Association, which only represents administration, not the community of Victor Harbor, nor the elected members. And as Councillor Kemp said, we are already sending the CEO there, so therefore I'll be voting against this recommendation.
Anyone else like to speak to the debate?
I have a question, 2 questions actually. Is the CEO a voting delegate, and what is the cost, and from which budget would the cost of sending the mayor come from?
Through the Deputy Mayor. The voting delegate is actually an elected member of council, so that's hence you need to appoint a voting delegate. And the cost would come out of elected members' training and development budget. So there is a budget allocation there.
Councillor Quimber has a question. Is this just a fact-finding thing? You go there, you talk, there's no voting going on, then you bring back the information and we vote on it?
No, so sorry, contrary to Councillor Burns' comments, it's not an organisation that represents administration. This is the Australian Local Government Association. So the Local Government Association is a membership body of councils of our state, and each state has a local government association. This is the Australian Local Government Association's meeting where motions that councils from across Australia can put forward motions to look at changes to local government more broadly from Australia, from a federation perspective. So there are also conferences, so there are speaking elements of various issues that are happening across Australia in local government, but there also is a voting component where motions that have been put forward from other LGAs and councils from across Australia are considered by the voting delegates that are there.
Are considered or voted on?
They're voted on. So hence part of this motion is around when we do receive the agenda for the Australian Local Government Association forum, that we consider whether we support or don't support various motions that are being put forward.
Okay. And
similar to our LGA one that we do here in South Australia.
And can you do it remotely?
No, I don't believe you can do it remotely, but it's a good question. I can happy to take it on board.
Maybe we need to find out if we can do it remotely, because I looked at, and we're going to be looking at the budget update later on. I think we need to start cutting some costs here, and I just think if we can do things remotely and not spend the money that, you know, we can save, then I think we should look into that. So I would probably actually ask for this to be deferred until that question can be answered.
Yep. So do time frame if we are going to.
So, Councillor Corimba, you're moving a formal motion that the matter be deferred.
Yep.
to the March meeting to enable a response to the question you've asked around can voting be done remotely.
Yes, thank you.
Do we have a seconder for that motion?
Stuart, councillor Burns.
Thank you.
seconder.
All right, I will put that to the vote now, please. And I'll ask the CEO to indicate the room's voting. All those in favour?
Those in favour are councillor Burns, councillor Quaremba and councillor Kemp,
Those against?
and councillors Mann, councillor Mackenzie, councillor Quinton, councillor Schofield and councillor Henson. The adjourned item is lost.
I'll call it
Division?
bingo.
Okay. Okay. Well, all those in favour of the formal motion? And I'll get Victoria to
Councillor
announce.
Burns, councillor Quaremba and councillor Kemp,
And those against?
councillor Mann, councillor Mackenzie, councillor Quinton, councillor Schofield and councillor Henderson.
Thank you, that's lost. Right, so is anyone else want to contribute to the debate for the original first motion? If not, I'll allow the mover to end the debate if she wishes to.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I will end the debate by saying we need to elect a voting delegate, and the Mayor is adequately suitable to be our delegate. The budget is already there for training purposes, and it is there for these very reasons.
Thank you. I will now put that to the vote. So all those in favour, please raise your hand. And so that has been carried. Those against, sorry, I'm new at this. And
3 against.
3 against. So that motion has been carried. Would you like to read the recommendation for item 2 for me, please, Victoria?
That council appoints Mayor Jenkins as the City of Victor Harbor voting delegate at the 2025 National General Assembly of Local Government.
Do we have a mover for that?
I'll move that, councillor Henderson.
Thank you. A seconder? Thank you, councillor Schofield.
Thank you.
Does anyone like to, with the mover or seconder, like to speak to this?
No, thank you.
Any others would like to speak to it?
Councillor Kemp, I have a question to the CEO. Will the, if this gets up, this motion, will the chamber be receiving any information prior to you deciding to give directions to the voting delegate?
So yes, through the Deputy Mayor, if you refer to items 3 and 4 in your agenda, there are 2 options. 3 is that we have a special council meeting where we bring the agenda back to the council to actually make that decision, or 4, you actually endorse the CEO and the Mayor and the Deputy Mayor to have delegation to vote on behalf of council or make that selection. So you've got that option coming up in a moment.
Anyone else would like to speak to the motion?
Councillor Mann.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, no, I definitely agree with sending the Mayor to this meeting at a national level. So many times we've talked about the impact from that federal government level on our local council, whether that be through greater funding through the federal assistance grants or coastal protection or a number of different things. And I definitely, whilst I appreciate looking at those, where there's those cost savings, but I think what can be gained by having the CEO and the Mayor meeting with the ministers and the relevant government officials at that federal level and attending something like this, I think that is worth putting this small investment in, noting there's already those funding there. So I'm completely in support of sending the Mayor to do what she does very well, which is building those relationships with other members of government and those high levels and really, I guess, representing Victor Harbour's interests.
Anyone else like to speak to the motion?
Councillor Quaremba, I have a question. Is there any evidence, factual evidence other than anecdotal that we can use or that can be presented to assess what Councillor Mann has actually said is true, other than just meeting people? Is there any actual, we met, this is what we spoke about, this has been the outcome?
Yes, through the Deputy Mayor. So at the last National General Assembly that the Mayor and I attended last year, the Mayor provided a full brief of the visits that she actually attended, and I, to all the various ministers, and where we advocated for grant funding through the Precinct and other projects, coastal adaptation that we are undertaking. The Mayor provided a full report to members following our return as to what engagements we'd actually undertaken while we were there.
Just a follow-up question. I maybe you didn't understand my question. I was asking for not anecdotal things. I'm saying tangible evidence where there has been an outcome financially through this process.
I don't have the exact figures off the top of my head, but we are obviously being successful for grant funding through our advocacy.
Anyone else like to speak to the debate that hasn't spoken? If not, the mover wishes to close the debate. No?
No, thank you.
Thank you. All those in favour of the motion? And those against? All right,
Call
so
the division.
hang on a minute. All right, it's been carried. And so now if we'd like to have those who voted in favour could please stand. And I'll get Victoria to announce the...
Those in favour: Councillor Mann, Councillor McKenzie, Councillor Quinton, Councillor Schofield and Councillor Henderson.
And if you could read, announce those against, please.
Those against: Councillors Burns, Councillor Corimba and Councillor Kemp.
Okay, that motion is carried. We have two motions up, number 3 and number 4, is that correct? And does anyone have a preference to either of those motions that they would like to put?
Councillor Burns, I have a preference for motion 3.
Okay, we have a seconder for that motion.
Councillor Corimba.
Okay, thank you. Would either Councillor Burns or Corimba like to speak to the motion?
Councillor Burns, I think this addresses Councillor Kemp's concerns and concerns of a number of us that we get presented the motions and provide direction to the voting delegate as to how this chamber would like the votes presented at this forum. So I'm supportive of option 3.
Anyone else would like to speak to the debate?
I would like to.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would concur with Councillor Burns. I think it's important that we don't usurp our responsibilities of elected members. All information should come back to the chamber. That's what we've been voted in to do, is represent the community as a whole, and then as a chamber push up a motion or a decision.
Any further persons wishing to speak to the debate?
Councillor Mann.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah, no, I completely agree with Councillors Corimba and Burns. I think with anything, the Mayor is just the mouthpiece of the council. So I think it's important that whatever we're wanting her to advocate or vote on, it comes from the council that's been elected by the community. So very happy to support this.
Any further debate?
Yes, just to add, I would have moved the 3 en bloc, and I would have put forward this option anyway.
Any further debate? Okay, Mr. Stuart Burns, would you like to close the debate?
Thank you. Nothing further to say. I think it's a good option. So hopefully all the fellow elected members will vote in support of it.
All right, that closes the debate. So I will ask those who are in favour, please raise your hand. Beautiful, unanimous. And I think that's the end of my first seat in the chair.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. I was going to say Quentin, but got that wrong. Thank you very much for doing that tonight for me. We now come to 9.4, which is the South Australian Rainbow Advocacy Alliance. We have 2 recommendations there. The first one being receive a note, or the recommendation that the City of Victor Harbor joins the Rainbow Council Alliance. Councillor Henderson.
I'd like to move the second.
So the second on block.
Second on block, correct.
Thank you. And do I have a seconder for that? Councillor Schiller. Thank you very much. Do I have somebody who would like to nominate to be the Victor Harbor representative on the network?
I would like to nominate yourself, the Mayor.
Thank you. I accept that nomination. With the permission of the council, I'd like to speak to that nomination if possible. Thank you. You can raise your hands if you permission. Thank you very much. So speaking to that nomination to be the Victor Harbor representative, this is an LGA board. It isn't the SA Rainbow Advocacy Alliance themselves, it's the LGA part of that. We already have in our acknowledgement that we talk about diversity here, meetings, and we have a diversity commitment which talks about respect for people with all of all sexualities. I think that the City of Victor Harbor Council joining the advocacy network of the LGA would be a positive and important step. As I said, we already have a policy to promote diversity and inclusion for LBG people in our community, and the network will add to that in many ways. By joining the network, the council demonstrates its commitment of fostering an inclusive and diverse community. It's not just talking about it, but it's actually doing something about it, where all individuals, regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity, feel welcomed and valued in our community. The LBGI community often faces unique challenges, including discrimination and marginalisation. By participating in the network, the council can advocate for and support policies and practices that protect the rights and well-being of LBGI members of our community. It also provides the council with access to valuable resources, training and best practice on how to better serve those community members, and would allow the council to implement effective strategies to promote equality, to raise awareness about discrimination and ensure that services are accessible and non-discriminatory. By showing solidarity with the community, the council can build a stronger relationship with diverse groups, enhancing overall community engagement, which can lead to a more vibrant, cohesive and supportive community. In short, the LGB Advocacy Network allows council to take a strong stand in favour of equality, promote the well-being of all of its citizens and become more inclusive. Any recommendations from the network would have to come to council to be endorsed. So this doesn't give council the free-for-all to do anything that it wants to do. If there's a recommendation that comes from that group, then it would need to come back here in order that we as a council representing our community endorse it. So I would say thank you very much, Marilyn, for nominating me. I will do my best. I've got a number of family members who are part of that community that have been discriminated against, that have been beaten up, that have had lots of trouble because of their sexuality. And I certainly want to see Victor Harbor be the caring and kind community that it is, where people are treasured for what they are. And are looked after.
Excuse me, Mayor, just a question, please. On the recommendation, isn't it supposed to require a vote? Because you just had a recommendation and then it was seconded and then nominated and went straight through. Isn't it still required to have a vote of the chamber?
It certainly does require a vote, and you can vote against it. I asked
haven't had a vote yet.
No, I asked the chamber if, well, Marilyn nominated me
Yes,
for,
but you didn't. call
and
the
we've
vote,
got a seconder, was councillor Schiller.
correct. but you didn't call
And
the vote.
does somebody want to speak to this? I'm speaking as a person who's been nominated, and if there were other nominations, they'd speak too. Now we go to the vote, and the actual recommendation. So does somebody want to speak? Councillor Henderson, do you want to speak to the recommendation?
I want to speak to the recommendation. Yes, I just want to say that the City of Victor Harbor does champion diversity in all of its iterations, and this is an extension of that, I believe.
Thank you. Councillor Schofield, do you want, oh, sorry, Councillor Schiller, do you want to speak as a seconder?
I made some inquiries prior to the meeting because I was querying whether this was going to be a partnership basically between the LGA and the Rainbow Alliance, and I'm happy to hear that it's coming from the LGA in a partnership type agreement, and so I feel comfortable to allow this to go ahead. There's quarterly meetings which are not going to be a great drain on our staffing resources, and I don't think we're paying our mayor to be on this committee. So from a financial perspective, it has no implications, and long as any sort of recommendations that come from that group are vetted through council, I can't see that there is a problem.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. I did forget to ask if there were any other nominations, if anybody else would like to nominate to be on it. No, thank you. Is there any discussion? Councillor Burns and then Councillor
Thank you,
Cudmore.
Mayor. The Councillor Schiller has just probably answered a couple of questions that I had. I like the idea that, as was mentioned, that anything will come back to council. It's not automatically making decisions. But I did have a question in looking into this. Isn't it already covered under the Sexual Discrimination Act in South Australia? All the protections, and I was quite concerned to hear that you had family members that had been discriminated against, because I thought there were laws against that these days.
There's certainly in the area of public life, if somebody treats somebody else badly because of their sexuality, that is covered under the Equal Opportunity Act in South Australia. It's also covered under the Human Rights Acts as well. But you know, a lot of these things, you know, in the private sphere, it's not covered, and being able to support our diverse community, I think, is really important, whether it's covered or not under the Equal Opportunity Act.
Obviously, if any other group of any other affiliation wishes to do the same thing, council's open to that as well? Absolutely,
just as in the past, any other group that wants council to be part of it or to be affiliated with it or to go to meetings, then that will come to council for a decision of council, as this is.
I was just concerned if it's just going to be one group, then you end up having, rather than inclusion, you end up with, you know, having separation rather than everyone working together. But if any group can come and do the same thing, then I think that's a good thing.
Yep, just as we, you know, have affiliation with other groups, we've had our Reconciliation Action Plan, and we're linked with the NAC, the Narrandjeri Aboriginal Corporation, and other Indigenous groups. We support and do things with our service with the RSL, and we've got members here that are members of the RSL outside of council, and other groups can come, but it needs to come to council for council to endorse it, to have a formal rep. Councillor Karemba.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to move a formal motion to defer this until we go out to consultation to the community. The reason I want to do that is because in order to be inclusive, we're actually excluding a large portion of our community who may not agree from the religious background, may not agree with this connection with council. So I think it's pertinent that we actually go and speak to them and ask them what they think.
I've got a formal motion on the floor. Do I have a second of the formal motion? Councillor Burns seconding that. All those in favour of the formal motion? Those against the formal motion?
I call a division.
Those in favour were Councillor Burns, Councillor Coimbra and Councillor Kemp. And the others were against. And did you wanted a division, Councillor Coimbra? That's right. But can those in favour please stand? Councillor Burns, Councillor Coimbra and Councillor Kemp. Those against, Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Mann, Councillor Schiller, Councillor Quinton, Councillor Schofield and Councillor Henderson. That formal motion is lost. Is there any further discussion? I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? This is the main motion now we're talking about. 1 and 2. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now move to the Audit and Risk Committee terms of reference. These terms of reference have been to the Audit Committee previously, and the recommendation is that Council adopts the reviewed terms of reference provided at attachment 1. Do I have someone to move that way, please? Thank you, Councillor Schofield, and seconding that, please. Councillor Quinton, do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak or have any questions? Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. I just had concerns with removing on page 32 the function 2.1, which is primarily out of the Act in saying the purpose of the committee is to provide independent assurance and advice to council on accounting, financial management, internal controls, risk management and governance matters. And I also have concerns about the removal of which is 2.4.1.2 on page 34, where the review and recommendation where appropriate of statements to be included in the annual report concerning internal controls and risk management. I think that latter is important for the community to actually see the comments, and the other is that whilst most of the changes in here are specifically focused on areas that the Audit Committee can look at, I understand the Audit Committee has an oversight of broader areas than what is just specified, and I believe that the first 2.1 is limiting what the Audit Committee could look at. All the other changes in there I'm happy with, except for those two.
You'll see, Councillor Burns, that 2.1, which you said you don't agree with it being crossed out because that's what the purpose is, has actually been moved up to where it says establishment and purpose. So 2.1, the function, which is crossed out, becomes 1.2. So it's exactly there, exactly the same, but it's been moved up to 1.2. And I didn't get to the next concern that you have, but Victoria may have.
Adding into the annual report, the comments on the internal controls.
That actually does occur because this is part of the requirements within the Act, that the annual business plan and the annual report actually go to the Audit and Risk Committee for their comment prior to coming to Council. So they do have input into those.
Understand that, but this is actually including their comments within the annual report. As long as that still stays in the annual report and hasn't been removed, then I'm fine. It's not a question that it goes to the Audit Committee, it's whether their comments.
They don't have comments.
It's on page 34, the top 2.4.1.2.
2 point.
So it's including in the annual report concerning internal controls and risk management. Thank you.
We can leave it in there, but I'm of the understanding that it's actually captured somewhere else and I just can't pick it up right now. So happy
Okay.
for it to remain in there.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? In that case, I will, Councillor Schofield, did you want to close the debate? I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. Sorry, Councillor Burns, were you for or against? Against, okay. We now move to 9.7, the December budget review. The recommendation being council endorses the, 9.6. I beg your pardon, I've lost 9.6. The internal audit plan. Council includes a budget allocation, a pre-budget allocation for the next budget to support engaging external consultants to develop the scope and undertake internal audits on legislative compliance, local government reform review and the planning reform. Would someone like to move that way, please? Thank you, Councillor Henderson, and seconded by Councillor Schiller. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Henderson? Councillor Schiller? Does anybody want to speak to that? Councillor Karimba?
Thank you, Mayor. Just regarding the $35,000, is that actually a quoted figure? Is that a figure that comes out of, like, how do you come to that figure? How do you know that that's the cost? Is it, that's what we've already been, consultants have already been asked what it's going to cost to do this, or is it just a pre-budget allocation, an amount roughly?
It's a cost estimate of what we would look to spend in terms of engaging external auditors to undertake the works. So it's a budget allocation.
Okay. And so after the process is done, there'd be a difference, would there, if it was less? And
If it was less, it'd be less. And if it
Yep.
was more, we would
and
need to come back.
how is that identified if it was less? Because, you know, just to me, it's like we have a lot of these, you know, budget allocations, but there's not actually a line item where it says we spent this much on this motion and this is what it actually costs. I'm just trying to find some ways of tracking where we're spending money and how close we are to the mark when it comes to this sort of stuff, because just seems to be a lot of this.
Well, that's what a budget is. A budget is an allocation of the spendings, and if that budget is exceeded, most of those budgets are estimated on cost estimates. We'll go out and seek what we anticipate those costs would be. We then are required as a government body would go out for tender or get costings or get quotes to ensure that we are within those budgets. If we're exceeding those budgets, we come back to the chamber and seek more funds. If we don't spend those funds, then through your quarterly budget reviews, we provide that information as to how we are tracking in accordance with those budgets for each project, as you have one of those in this agenda item as we speak.
Sure. What I'm after is basically just some way of checking that what we're allocating and, you know, resourcing is actually what we're spending on those things, and that the money, if there's any left over, doesn't get moved around to other line items. I'd just like to, can we get a report
That's
for each
what
one
your
of these things?
budget review provides you with.
For each individual? So for this one, yep, great, thanks.
Are there any further discussions, questions? In that case, I'll put it to the floor. Councillor Henderson, do you want to close the debate? No. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. 9.7, the December budget review. So council endorsed the 24-25 budget review, showing a net capital expenditure of 13 million offhand and an operating deficit of 3 million offhand. And would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Schiller. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. It's interesting that the movers and seconders are all coming from one side of the room. It'd be great if everyone participated. Would either of you like to speak to this? Does anybody want to speak to this? Thank you, Councillor Kemp.
Yes, on page 52 of the agenda, it has a statement here called year-to-date actuals as of the 30th of December 24 reflect completed transactions and do not include committed costs where a purchase order has been raised but not yet billed. I understand under the financial statements we can't have unpaid transactions in there, but is it possible in the commentary to, under a title called committed costs, to actually have what is committed? So we have a better understanding of exactly what is future expenditure will be, just to give us a bit more information of understanding.
Kelly, can you respond to that, please?
Thank you, through the Mayor. So the committed costs that the report's referring to is essentially purchase orders or requisitions that have been raised. And then we may not have actually received the goods or the invoices for that at the time of putting the budget together. So the year-to-date actuals is what we're required to report on in terms of what has actually hit our accounts. And what we're basically saying is that we haven't included amounts where we are in the process of doing procurement processes, tendering, quoting, or giving out purchase orders, essentially where we haven't had the goods or services provided yet.
Any further, Councillor Burns?
Thank you. I think Councillor Mann also wanted to. That's right. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Mann, I didn't see your hand there.
That's right. Just a clarification question, please. I appreciate the effort going in reducing the deficit and appreciate any savings that can occur. I was just wondering whether the reduction would still be achieved if we didn't have the increase in the rate amount for the sports precinct. So the additional amount that we raised as rates, if that, because the sports precinct hasn't gone ahead, would that, if that rate increase wasn't there, would we still be looking at a $3 million deficit, or would it be higher?
Kelly?
So through the Mayor, there's a number of items that have impacted the reduction in the deficit. One of those is that we have removed the $2.5 million that was a contribution for the Sport and Rec precinct because it's unlikely to happen by the 30th of June. We've had increased depreciation of approximately $1 million, which has unfortunately reduced that reduction, which is a little bit of a backwards way of saying it. But essentially the 1.2% that we raised through rates for the Sport and Rec precinct has been able to be used to offset borrowings and reduce debt, and will also reduce the impact of the Sport and Rec precinct contribution in future years.
Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Just a few participatory questions. I guess in terms of, we seem to have a few repeat offenders with depreciation and FRAWA really is always the ones that come and mess up our beautifully prepared budgets. I note with the depreciation now putting an additional 3% index in the allocation of, I assume, our new budgets moving forward. Is that enough? And is something similar being looked at in terms of FRAWA as well? Because I guess personally, I'd prefer to allow that index to be a bit more. So if the depreciation isn't as much, then we've got more to pay down borrowings, as opposed to often ruining any surplus or balanced budget throughout the year.
So through the Mayor, two items there. We have taken up the Audit Committee's recommendations around FRAWA costs when they come through budget reviews, that we immediately use those figures in our next review as well, including any equity adjustments. So that has been factored into this particular review. In regards to depreciation, there are a number of reasons why we weren't able to accurately forecast that in the beginning. But we have, in the review of our long-term financial plan, had a look at what our indexation is around revals, which is one of the things that has impacted the increase in depreciation. And we're now including a 10% index on classes of assets that are going to be revalued in the next year, as at the 1st of July.
Yeah, thank you. That's great. No, I'm glad to hear that, because I guess, whilst I think depreciation's that thing that's affecting all councils around the state. Unfortunately, our neighbours in Alexandrina got caught out to that tune of, I think, 157 million, where I guess our 1 million here doesn't look as bad, but still we don't want to have this situation. We want to try and make sure we are accurately budgeting for that and allowing for those depreciation cost increases. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Any further discussion or questions? Councillor Karemba and then Councillor Quinton.
Thank you, Mayor. My question is around the $3.5 million of gifted assets that we didn't know were going to come our way. I'm just trying to, if someone can explain to me how that can happen. I'm just struggling to understand how that's a surprise. because I'm assuming these are gifted assets from developments which would have what these gifted assets are going to be and generally a date when they would be delivered. So I'm just kind of wondering, did a park just pop out of nowhere or?
Through the Mayor, no, a park didn't pop out of nowhere. And so we do have an idea in terms of developments, what will be coming across. What we don't know at the time is the exact timing of that, depending on when the defects period ends. And we also don't have an exact amount of all of what the assets will actually need to be costed on our books until the work is done to actually put them into the system. So normally we would be able to have a bit more of an accurate forecast, but changing from our old accounting system to the new accounting system, we were still working through some things with that in terms of processes and getting those assets commissioned so that we could accurately forecast. So we generally do have an idea what's coming across and when, but we don't know the exact extent of the impact until it's processed in the system.
Just a follow-up question, with the new computer system, will that then would that be gone, that issue? Will it be more accurate when it comes to these gifted assets?
Through the Mayor, not necessarily, because again, we have to process it. The issue we had this time is because we were halfway between two systems, we didn't have all the information in one place and we were delayed in commissioning the assets. So we weren't able to run those forecasts as accurately as we could have.
Okay, so just to follow up on that, so what you're saying is even with the new computer system, we're still going to have the same issue?
Through the Mayor, there will still be an issue with timing and knowing the exact value of the assets until they're processed.
Okay, I'm still struggling to understand how that could be the case because we know what the asset's going to be and we know when they're going to be delivered because the developer would have a Gantt chart as to when they're going to deliver things. So is it just a communication issue or where's the I'm just trying to get a more tighter system here so we don't get caught out with these things.
So through the Mayor, in terms of the end of the practical completion and then defects period, that whilst there is a date set around that, it can be extended. It does change often. And so when we think assets might be delivered, they may not actually be delivered at that point. We also need to work through and do on-site inspections and make sure that we have captured all of the assets that are being gifted and prepare them to be put into the system in terms of all the integrity and all of the different parts of the assets that are getting captured. So there's a lot of different moving parts. They have different component levels and we need to make sure that they're all processed in the system by the unit rates applicable to each bit.
Okay, just one last question. So the gifted assets, when the developer would identify what those gifted assets are going to be prior to once the development's been approved. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yep. So can we have then ask them for a list so that we can actually start allocating them in earlier, or do we have to wait till they're handed over?
Through the Mayor, we don't have to wait till they're handed over to start working on it, but we would need to wait till they're handed over to commission them in the system, to process them and commission them in the system, because we don't want them in the system depreciating before they become our assets.
Okay, thanks.
Councillor Kemp.
Question for Finance Manager Kelly
Sorry,
Knight.
Councillor Quinton. Sorry, Councillor Kemp, carry on.
Again, just a bit more information around the index of 3% for the depreciation. Did you mention 10% now instead of 3%? So you're going to a 10% indexation?
Through the Mayor, that's correct, in future budgets. So the amount that was put into this particular budget review, it was 3% because we had already applied an index in the beginning of the year to the original adopted budget. So this is based on the assets that are currently being revalued and the gap in the indexation based on the numbers we had at the time the budget was adopted.
So if we go to a 10% indexation, because we have to raise rates to cover that increase of 7%, just wondering if the valuation comes in and it's under that 10% increase, what happens to that money that we raised?
So that money would be raised, the money that was raised would either be used to pay off debt, go into reserve, or be used for other things that council approves along the way.
I think I'd rather stick to a more actual indexing of 3% to maybe 4 or 5%, but raising it to 10% is really, to me, is a bit extravagant. So when does this get finalised in our current budget coming up in 24, 25, 26? Is that when the 10% will apply?
So through the Mayor, yes, there will be a 10% index applied for council's consideration to 25, 26. We have had that figure independently looked at as well in terms of the assumptions around it. The reason it's 10% is because we only do a revaluation every 4 years. So if we consider an average CPI of 2.5% in each year of 4 years, we're coming out at 10%. And that's how much, approximately how much we would say the assets would be revalued over that period.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Quinton.
Just a quick question regarding the public conveniences increased costs. The $90,000 increase due to vandalism call-outs and also the increased costs at the RV dump point. Do you have a split as to how much each of them sort of factor into?
Kelly?
Through the Mayor, I don't have it on me, but I can provide that if you would like that to elected members in an email.
Just wondering, because I'm thinking about the RV dump point, if most of that cost is through increased costs there, it'd be interesting to know what the actual cost is for that, providing that free RV dump point. Doing a little bit of research, I've realised that most places seem to actually charge for RV dump points, and maybe we should consider that going forward, given that there is a lot more caravan traffic coming through Victor Harbour. And if it's costing that much to ratepayers, that'd be something I think we could tighten up pretty nicely. So everyone agrees?
Thank you, Councillor Quinton. Are there any further questions about the budget review? No. Councillor Schiller, Councillor Henderson, do you want to close the debate? No. In that case, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. 9.8 is the 24-25 annual business plan mid-year review. And the recommendation is to receive and note the report if someone would like to move that way. Thank you, Councillor Burns, seconding Councillor Kemp. Do either of you want to speak to that? No? Councillor Kemp?
Yes, going through the key activities, or rather the major projects, it's a very good report. I'm just wondering, for looking at the status on track, this seems to be, what does that actually mean on track? Because we have no information as to where on track it means. So I'm just wondering, do council staff do a Gantt chart for each project? Is it possible to have a copy of that Gantt chart included in the information so we can see, and the milestones, because if it's on track or it's not started yet, so at least it gives a better idea what's happening with the major projects.
Through the Mayor, in terms of the capital projects, we were already providing members with a Gantt chart of those projects in terms of their progress. Some of the projects is not actually easy enough just to give you a Gantt chart, because I think there is, they're saying they're on track. It means that we're looking to complete the delivery of those projects this financial year and on budget. So I can have a look at what items I can do a Gantt chart for, but some are just a delivery of the project, and some are actually over 2 financial years. But we certainly already provide it for the capital items, but I'll have a look at the other items to see if I can actually create something for members that will be helpful.
Just a clarification, CEO, when was that Gantt chart provided?
It was actually after the last council meeting. Councillor Burns asked for that, and we provide it to members through your CM update, and we'll continue to update that. It's got all of our capital projects on it throughout the year.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions or any discussion? In that case, I'll put it to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Uh, 9.9 is the service level review, and I'm happy to do that recommendation en bloc. If
Can I have them
you
individually, please?
would like to do it individually. So the first recommendation is council receive and note the service level plan, noting that it is a live document and it will be periodically reviewed. You moving that way, Councillor Schofield? Thank you. And seconding that, Councillor Corimba? Thank you. Do either of you want to speak to it? Councillor Schofield? No. Councillor Corimba? Does anybody want to speak to it? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. The second recommendation is that council consider an allocation of $60,000 in the draft budget to enable service level reviews to be undertaken for open space and environment and finance. My understanding is that this has gone through the audit committee, and the audit committee have endorsed this recommendation. Moving that way, Councillor Henderson, and seconding that, please. Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Henderson.
Just briefly, yes. As a growing council, we are taking on more and more open space as developments occur. And of course, again, with a growing council, the finance department is continually having more business, if you like, sent their way for the whole operation of this council. So I think these are two very important areas that we do need to look at and see how they are operating, what their future needs are, what their current needs are and their future needs are, because there is more and more pressure on these departments all the time.
Thank you, Councillor Henderson. Councillor Mackenzie, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, just to agree with Councillor Henderson there. We are a growing council, so there is the expectation that there's more pressure on these services. So yeah, it is important to review them and expected that they require more resources to grow.
Thank you. Councillor Burns, you wanted to speak?
Yes, thank you. I also agree that both the areas identified are important to understand, and a service level review is, I think, the right way to go. I just struggle with why we have to pay consultants $60,000, why the managers and directors are not capable of doing the service level plans themselves, as per private sector or other local government organisations. That's my only challenge. They're very familiar with the needs. They can put together a plan proposal. Why does it need to go to consultants?
I'll ask the CEO to respond to that query. Councillor Burns.
Thank you for the question. So obviously we undertake reviews internally, but these two reviews we are looking for some independent oversight. Obviously council is quick to scrutinise and maybe question the administration on our reviews. The majority of that expense would actually be for open space, because to actually undertake a full review of our open space and environment, it would actually be assessing every single one of our assets, all of our reserves, our playgrounds, our parks, our gardens, to see whether the actual classification of how we're maintaining them is to the standard that our community want to undertake. The finance review would be more of a desktop review, so the expenses are certainly not associated with that review. We see that as very much an internal. But these reviews would also, particularly the open space and environment, would involve a fair bit of community engagement, because the reviews are about what our community's expectations are and what level of service they are seeking and what we are delivering. So it's not just a matter of looking at what we do, how we do it and how many people we've got. It's actually going, are we delivering to the needs and wants of our community? Do we have the resources to do that? Are we doing too much? Are we doing too little? So it's a comprehensive service level review.
Councillor Corimbo.
Just a question regarding this review. So we're going to be looking at parks and seeing whether we are looking after them adequately according to what the community want, or if we have to increase serviceability. Will that also come with identification of the actual cost? Because I think it's okay to say to everybody or ask them how well they want their parks looked after or which parks to look after. But I think if we don't attach a cost with that, I think that would lead to problems, because then the first thing that will happen is when the rates come in, people will complain. I think it's prudent that we actually say, in order to achieve what you're asking, this is what it's going to cost. So will that be a component of this review?
Through the Mayor, absolutely. That's what a service level review is doing. It's not just looking at the bells and whistles, it's going, what is the cost associated with that?
Councillor Kemp.
Yes, the service level review plan states that the key benefits include identifying cost savings, optimising resources, improving performance and mitigating risk, and it just goes on a little bit further. What other key areas will you be looking at in the future for doing service level reviews? Do you have a list of key areas that needs it done compared to internal reviews?
So we have included that within the plan of all the different departments. We also gave a bit of history of where we've actually undertaken service level reviews in the past. So the last one was a community wellbeing. We undertook one of library services as well. So yes, the plan is about an ongoing review. This is just the first two that I've selected I see as priorities, because we do a lot of anecdotal discussions around open space and environment. But I think if you actually have a full review, then you can address that appropriately with the required resources or savings or whatever it may be. And also finance, because I know there's been some significant impacts through the new changes with the system. But yes, there will be more. I will bring them through to Audit Committee and Council as we progress.
Just another question. Since we are already starting looking at a community garden and a biodiversity nursery, would that be taken into the account in the review to see the benefits and the cost savings in the future for the community?
Yes, it would look at all of those, because those particular areas are impacting on the resources of our open space and environment teams.
Thank you. Is Councillor Mann?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, no, I definitely agree the importance around doing these reviews, and I completely agree with Councillor Crember's points around the costs, especially with the open space, because even we've spoken about tonight with developer contributions to council and how they can affect our budget, and I think it's important for the community to realise that often the council is always put between a rock and a hard place when it comes to developer contributions, because we have the developer who puts in all this amazing infrastructure, playgrounds, beautiful parks, expensive footpaths to sell the development. And then once they've sold it and everyone's bought it, they then hand it over to council. And then it's up to council to try and fund and to maintain, increasing our depreciation, increasing the amount of work for our outdoor space team. So I guess importantly, to get the costings of what the different areas look like would be important, but I think also to consult with the community and look at where are the anomalies in our community based on, I know we've done, and this probably ties in with our open space review that we've done previously, because I think there's definitely pockets in our community where they're used to a higher level of standard than other parts of our community. I know, for example, there's certain parts in Encounter Lakes where they have a higher grade of open space maintenance than other areas, because that's what either they've advocated for or they're used to. So I think if we're going to make it fair across the whole community, we need to look at what is it for a private area or what is a communal space, and trying to manage those, I think is very important to be done, because I don't think, particularly in the open space and environment area, we're not going to be finding, it's always going to be an increasing cost. And so it's how we use the existing resources better. And that may mean lowering the standard in certain parts, so that there's equity across the community. I guess one question to follow up in relation to the finance department is I probably agree with the comments expressed by our independent audit committee around the timing of the review, because I know finance has been impacted probably the most by a new corporate systems review. And I worry about the ability for an independent person to come in and say, here's some efficiencies, or here's a way you can use it, where finance is still working out how to use the new corporate systems. So I guess just any comments around that query.
Yes, through the Mayor, extremely good points, because I was about to seek the Mayor's permission if I could just bring that to your attention. So we did have a very good discussion at the Audit and Risk Committee about the service level reviews, but also they expressed some concern about the timing for the finance. So I have put it on there because I know finance is significantly impacted through the new corporate system, because every single element of it is impacting on finance, and the resources within finance are struggling with that. So I did reassure we weren't looking at actually getting external, I would say, to assist in that, but also around the timing. If I had felt that coming into 2026, we were not in a position that a review was not going to actually help or identify, and we weren't in a position to review, it wouldn't be an effective review, then we would hold off. They certainly expressed the need for open space and environment, because we are considerable growth in those areas. Every time a developer hands over more area and more space, we are having to look after those needs. So yes, I was very aware of those concerns raised by the Audit and Risk Committee, and we'll monitor that depending how we're tracking with the corporate systems implementation.
Councillor Schiller.
Just a reflection of the support for the open space service review. As Braden was indicating, there's probably inconsistency over the reserves and parks throughout the council area, some that are located quite centrally, and in other suburbs that don't seem to get the same attention to those that might have been mentioned before. So how we can bridge the gap between the reserves that are getting a lot of attention and those that are not.
Is there any further discussion? Councillor Henderson, did you want to close the debate? I'll put that then to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now have the Encounter Centre Collaboration and Grant Agreement update. I'll declare a general conflict of interest, but noting that this is just receiving and noting the report, I will stay in the room and continue with my job. Councillor Henderson, you want to move that way? Do I have a seconder for that? That recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Schofield. Do either of you want to speak to it?
I just want to say briefly, it's great to see the Encounter Centre going from strength to strength.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to speak to it? Councillor Burns?
Thank you, Mayor. Wanting to just express similar sentiments. It's good to see that they have been working hard to turn around their financial situation. The one thing that was sort of lacking a bit out of what we were provided was they understand their targets, what they're aiming to, but when do they believe they would get to a point of being able to cover their operational costs? You know, it might be 2 years, 3 years out. It'd be helpful.
The operational costs are being covered,
Okay.
and the centre has gone from 3 months before they had to declare liquidation to, I think at the last meeting it was 18 months.
Okay.
So
all this is additional on top of that.
Yep.
Great. Good. Thank you.
So it is continuing to improve. Does anybody else have any other questions? Councillor Kemp?
Yes, it's good to see that the Encounter Centre is coming out the other side of the woodwork. So the $60,000 that we committed to them is actually attributed to what areas? Can you say where it was spent, or it just goes into general revenue for them to?
Look, I'd need to go back and have a look.
Okay.
I think this report is really just looking at the business plan that the council wanted from the centre. So it's really focusing on that. And later on in the year, we'll give you a much more up-to-date report on how that money's being spent specifically.
On the business plan side, I went through it, and it certainly has a lot of headings, but not much actual body to the plan. I'm just wondering whether it's a bit light on, in my opinion, as what a business plan should look like and what it provides in the way of what they're doing over the next 12 months, because it's only for 25. It doesn't go on for 3 years or something like that, which I thought it would have been. But anyway, just to give that feedback to the board that, you know, from my opinion anyway, it's just a bit light on it as a business plan.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, just to, I guess, agree. It's great to see that the encounter centres are doing so well or turned a new page. And I think it was one of our former councillors, Mr. Nick Hales, who was quite instrumental in that. So it's really good to see.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now come to Environment and Infrastructure, Regional Community Sport and Recreation Precinct Heads of Agreement Extension. So this recommendation is authorising the CEO to update the Heads of Agreement with a revised expiry date of the 31st of May. You're moving that way, Councillor Burns?
Propose a alternate motion, please, to defer this to the May council meeting and to have a workshop in April where we actually go through some counter proposals back to the developer. So I think our leverage at the moment is that this agreement's going to expire, and if we just extend it, I believe we lose some opportunity for leverage in negotiations.
I believe we have got a workshop looking at the different models in the next week on Monday.
Okay.
So we have that. We
But
have
I
that
prefer
workshop.
we don't actually extend the agreement. The motion is to extend or make a decision of the May meeting, not now. So it gives us an opportunity to workshop through to discuss.
Okay. So what is your motion, Councillor Byrne?
To defer 12.1 to the May council.
Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Crember?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I think what Councillor Burns is trying to allude to is if we defer this, the developer isn't going to walk away, but it gives us an opportunity to actually unpack the heads of agreement and come up with what I would argue, and I agree with Councillor Burns, is a much better option for council and the ability to do things outside of the current heads of agreement. So I think it's prudent. We're not walking away from the developer or the private-public partnership, but I think we need to renegotiate the heads of agreement and its terms. And in order to do that, we as a council need to unpack what is currently the heads of agreement, and then I would argue come up with more favourable terms moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Mann.
Question, are we able to extend something that may expire before we're wanting to extend it?
That's a very good question.
Through the Mayor, you are correct. So the current heads of agreement expires on the 31st of March. Hence, we were bringing this to extend it to the 31st of May to enable us to continue those discussions.
Any further discussion?
Can I make an amendment to the motion?
It's your motion. You can do what you want.
Not
with
my
it.
motion.
You moved.
Oh,
the-
sorry. Okay. Just amend the dates. Obviously, Councillor Burns has got the dates wrong. So the motion, the term expires on the 31st. How about we have a workshop prior to the council meeting and then go ahead, because the
We've got
council
a
meeting is
workshop
just
on
before
Monday
that.
night.
Yeah, but the workshop is about the models, not about the heads of agreement, correct? This is about the heads of
Correct.
agreement. I'm asking to have a
So
workshop
what is your amendment, Councillor Coramba?
to defer this till the next council meeting, which will be prior to the expiry of the heads of agreement as it stands, correct? Just want a clarification on that before I put the motion up.
So wouldn't that be the March?
Okay,
March meeting's on the
Yep.
24th of March.
Correct.
great. So have a workshop prior to the expiry of the current heads of agreement to, as I said, unpack and come up with more favourable terms moving forward if we decide to go ahead with this new heads of agreement. We only have one opportunity, and that would be now before signing on to the existing heads of agreement.
Councillor Burns, are you happy with that variation of the
Because that
motion?
would achieve the workshop, and then it provides clearer direction to the CEO to be able to continue negotiations with the developer, and also allows us to use the heads of agreement as a for leverage.
Does anybody want to speak to that motion? Councillor Kemp?
Yes, I think it's important that we get our ducks lined up because according to the commentary in here, this is about our third iteration of a heads of agreement extension, I think, from what's in the documents here. So, sorry, go ahead.
So it's the second extension.
That's
So
second.
you amended it in October to include the council's ability to look at a council operated option, the buyback, and also the purchase of the detailed designs. This is the second extension
Second, all right.
of just time frame, no other elements of the actual heads of agreement. The heads of agreement still contains all the original council's
Yeah.
requirements of non-negotiables.
Having extensions and things like this actually adds time to a project. And of course, you know, I think while we keep doing these extensions at times, I think we could get on with the job and actually get it built ourselves, you know, in a certain time and fashion. So I agree with having a look at this proposal to break it down again, revisit it, get our heads around it, and to look at exactly what type of model is the best one for us to go through, and whether the heads of agreement goes ahead or not. Again, we've got to look at what's best for our community.
Councillor Mann.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, no, I'm not sure about this motion. It seems to be a bit of a motion on the fly in some ways, but what I do know is that we need to extend this heads of agreement because it will lapse, and we have been told by our independent audit committee, and we've discussed in the chamber around, there is still a lot that council needs to work through in terms of the models that we're looking at. And in terms of the negotiations with the proponent, again, this is a high level heads of agreement. If council are looking at favourable terms and looking at how we negotiate that with the proponent, if council is to go down that path with the proponent, those negotiations are still to be had. We are still at a very high level in a sense in terms of those negotiations. And we have got the financial modelling for the first time maybe 3 weeks ago or 4 weeks ago now, and there's still a lot more that needs to be unpacked in that sense. I think personally, I was quite happy and am quite happy with the existing of looking at extending that current heads of agreement to allow for those discussions and further investigations to be had. And I believe it are still within the scope of what we were needing to explore in terms of the options before us and the different fallback positions, and the fact that there is no guarantee that that a public-private partnership could or will eventuate. But there's still options as the fallback can still be investigated, and I think there's different discussions or different things are being referred to in this motion. But I guess in that summary, we're looking at extending that heads of agreement as it currently stands, which allows for those continued negotiations to allow for more time. If anything, potentially my worry is that maybe it might not be long enough, and it may be the case that we need to go back and say, hey, we need to extend it again. Hopefully not, because I guess what the community might not have appreciated is the current time frame was to work towards the federal government elections and trying to get something where it could be shovel ready, so we could go to the federal government, we could go and try and attract that extra funding. But I think the importance of getting the modelling right, and especially with the operating model, is so significant that we need to spend this extra time, that if it means missing out on a bit of grant funding here or there as part of the federal government, then I think it's worth having that extra time to explore it. We've talked a lot tonight about the depreciation and the impact of that. If council want this to be on our books and not to be through a public-private partnership, or maybe it's on our books because we went for the hybrid option or whatever it is, then I guess that depreciation is something that, again, we need to consider. The heads of agreement has been negotiated and extended so council's had 2 opportunities to one, negotiate it, and then negotiate it and extend it. And I think it's important in this instance that we have that extra time, and all the important negotiations and discussions will come out as part of if council is wanting to go forward with the proponent and drilling down at that micro level, because I think that's really where it is important if we do go forward with it.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Henderson?
Totally agree with everything Councillor Mann has just said.
Anybody else? I'll just let people know that if this recommendation that's on the board at the moment is lost, then we'll go back to the recommendation that is in the agenda. Councillor Burns, did you want to close the debate?
Close, thank you.
Sorry?
I'll close.
Yes, thank you.
Sorry, isn't that my motion? I amended the motion.
No, it was Councillor Burns's motion, and Councillor, you varied the motion, you and Councillor Burns together.
Okay.
It's Councillor Burns's motion.
Yeah, I
Councillor
wanted
Burns,
to
do you want to
speak to it,
close?
but-
Councillor Burns, do you want to close the debate?
Can Councillor Krember just wanted to talk to it, and I'm happy if he actually does talk to close it.
He didn't talk to it earlier on, but with leave of the meeting, is the meeting happy for Councillor Krember to? Yep, Councillor Krember, would you like to speak to
Yeah.
it?
Thank you, Chamber. I just want to make it clear to the elected body that this deferment motion doesn't actually stop us from signing the heads of agreement. But I believe that, and we can't go into the discussion about the heads of agreement because it is in confidence for now. This will come out of confidence. And what I'm alluding to is that I think we can do a much better deal if we just go and I could be wrong, you can all vote on it, but I'm just saying we need to unpack the heads of agreement, maybe put in a few more favourable terms that may get better outcomes for the community, and not doing this at some stage will come out of confidence, and then the questions will be asked, why wasn't it done? So I'm just trying to help the chamber. The heads of agreement doesn't expire before this motion. We can still sign the heads of agreement and leave it as is, but I would hate for the community to think that we haven't done everything we possibly can to get the best deal out of this heads of agreement. That's the whole point of this motion.
Councillor Burns, do you want to close the debate?
Closing it now, thank you. I'm fine.
You're fine. Okay, I'll put that motion to the floor. The debate's just closed, Councillor Quinton, sorry. I'll put this to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? Sorry.
All the
that's lost.
division.
Those in favour, please stand. Councillor Burns, Councillor Koremba and Councillor Kemp. Those against, Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Mann, Councillor Schiller, Councillor Quinton, Councillor Schofield and Councillor Henderson. That motion is lost. We now return to the motion 12.1 and someone can move that way. Councillor Mann moving that way and seconding Councillor Henderson. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Mann?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I guess I just asked the CEO to give, for the benefit of the council and community, a bit of a broad overview of what a heads of agreement is. And I guess there's been comments around favourable terms and things like that. I think I don't want a situation where we're confusing a framework of negotiation with the actual negotiation of the terms of a deal, if that's possible.
Yes, I can through the mayor. So the heads of agreement it's referred to as not a non-binding legal document. It's not a lease. It's not a contract. It's just terms in which the council has entered into with a proponent saying we have non-negotiables are the things that we want delivered out of this for our community. And some of those, for example, are a forecourt basketball stadium, community facilities that other community members can utilise and actually makes benefits for the broader community. There were a number of other terms in there. The council has recently incorporated into that it would like to also consider the opportunity to be the operator, as the developer has come forward with a preferred operator in their negotiations that they originally presented to council. So the last amendment, the council said that that's fine, but the council would also like to consider it being the operator and also have direct input into those detailed designs. The council would like to explore the options of buying it back from the developer in 42 years, because there was some concerns raised around the community about the longer term land lease for that site. And the council also wanted to make sure that if, for example, this public-private partnership didn't come to fruition, it was in a position to actually have some detailed designs within its hands. So the consultation with the developer, the last iteration of the heads of agreement was to get the developer to move ahead with those detailed designs, noting that council would look to buy them back to a maximum cost of about $750,000, so that it was ready, shovel ready to apply for any grant funding itself if this partnership didn't come to fruition. The heads of agreement will lead the council into making sure all the terms and conditions council is comfortable with if it was to progress further to an agreement for lease. And even then, the agreement for lease is just to articulate the terms of what that lease would look like, would then lead on to the actual lease itself.
Excellent. Thank you, CEO. I think, I guess in terms of this motion and looking at the extension of the existing one and those terms is that, as I said before, council have negotiated this twice and looked at different models and varied that scope already and increased it. I guess what we're hearing from that, again, council is always in between a rock and a hard place. We're hearing community saying, you've been exploring this, well, this project's been going on for 10 years. You've been exploring the public-private partnership for at least a year. And we're at this point where we're only just getting a very high level idea of the financial implications of that. Now, to then go back and then for council to consider the heads of agreement, the broad framework for which we do the negotiations with is again, either a change of the scope or expanding that. And we're never really getting closer to a target of what does the financial implications look like for council to do a public-private partnership, or for council to, as the CEO said, explore an option where maybe council is the operator, but does not own the facility. We have a broad framework to work within at the moment to start exploring those things. And I think the time needs to be spent on looking at a deeper level, as our audit committee has said, those financial implications of the options, noting that there are fallback positions, and even if we do want to proceed down that public-private partnership, it's still subject to grant funding and a number of other things. So I think we have to be careful when we're trying to expand the scope and reduce it, because we don't progress down at that deeper level where we need to be able to actually make an informed decision about whether this is the right or the wrong decision for council.
Thank you, Councillor Mann. Does
Point of
anybody,
order. Oh, sorry.
what's your point of order, Councillor Karim?
That's all right. You're going to let everybody else speak, so that's great. Thanks.
Does anybody else want to speak to the item? Councillor Karimba.
Thank you. I think a couple of questions actually. If this heads of agreement is such an, high level document and it's not really hold us to any sort of commitment, and why is it in confidence? Why don't we just let the community know the terms? If there's no real terms that would be bad or would be seen in the community's eyes as bad for the community, why don't we just release it?
Through the Mayor. So I guess it's like any other contractual item that we're in with a proponent with. I mean, it's not just up to council, it's up to the proponent. Pretty much most of the terms, if not all of the terms we speak about that are in the heads of agreement. But it may be a discussion I can have with the developer if they're prepared to actually release it. But again, I would say that's the responsibility of the council, and that's what you're elected for, is for you to actually be really clear of what the heads of agreement is and what's in it.
Okay.
That's your role as councillors.
And just another, I guess, a follow-up question. So was it the choice of the developer to put it into confidence, or was it also the administration or the council to put it into confidence? Who initiated the in-confidence requirement of this heads of agreement?
It was actually as part of the negotiation framework. So it was actually an agreement between both parties, and council has obligations, commercial in confidence obligations. So it was both parties.
Okay. And when you say council, you mean actually you'd be yourself, administration, and then that was actually then given to the elected members, because we didn't actually ask for this to go into confidence. It was presented that way. Is that
You
correct?
make the decision to go into confidence. I provide you with a recommendation under the requirements of the Act about your obligations as to what information should and shouldn't be made publicly available, and then you as a chamber make that decision.
Okay. And you said that we talk about a lot of the things of the heads of agreement. What aren't we allowed to talk about the heads of agreement when it comes to the community?
Pretty much who the proponent is. I don't have it right here in front of me, so I can't tell you right now.
You didn't think there's any other pertinent issues as to why we wouldn't be able to go out to the community?
Not off the top of my head, but as I said, I'm happy to have that discussion with the proponent. But again, it's like any normal commercial terms. We are in negotiations with this proponent, not any other one. So when we went out for an expression of interest, if we wanted it to be open to all and sundry and we were going to share everything, then we would have, but we haven't. We've decided to go into a public-private partnership with this proponent, hence the heads of agreement around those terms, and hence there is a level of confidentiality currently while we are still negotiating that should be retained.
Okay, just one last question. Is the developer actually keen to come out of the woodwork?
Yes, they absolutely are, and we are pretty much ready and poised to actually make that announcement. But we are going to wait until the members have actually had a look at both of those models next week. And given that it's actually not a announcement to say that this is who council is actually going to partner with right now, but it's who we are in negotiations with, they are very keen because they have stated that that's pretty much the only thing that's not available.
Okay, and just one last thing. Obviously, they're really happy to come out and tell us who they are. Are they happy to come out and speak about the terms of the heads of agreement as well? Is that something we can ask them to release?
I can't speak on behalf of the developer. I mean, you're asking questions of a developer.
Can we ask them that though, when we meet next? Great,
Yes.
thanks.
Does anybody else have any questions or anything that they would like to say? No. Councillor Mann, I think you moved this. Would you like to wrap up? In that case, I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour and those against? That's carried, thank you.
Or division.
And a division. All those in favour? Councillor Mann, Councillor Mackenzie, Councillor Schiller, Councillor Quinton, Councillor Schofield and Councillor Henderson. And those against? Councillors Burns, Corimba and Kemp. That is carried. We now come to 12.2, which is about the signalised pedestrian crossing on Adelaide Road. The recommendation is that council endorse an increase in the 2024-25 budget, operating budget of $50,000 to enable the delivery of this crossing. Moving that way, Councillor Schiller, and do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Henderson. And do you want to speak to that, Councillor Schiller?
We've had a similar sort of motion come through recently that was beyond the budget that we had, and I don't think I can mention what it was, but I'd like to also explain that we need to take that sort of consideration into account here. This is providing a safe means of access for people to walk across a very busy road. We do not have many signalised pedestrian crossings, and we have the opportunity that Audit has agreed to this signalised crossing being placed there, and that in itself is a major coup to get that approval. And so therefore I think we need to extend the budget with that 50,000 extra to accommodate having this and making it happen.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. Does Councillor Henderson, did you want to speak to this?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Yes, this is, as we all know, this is a very busy road. Lots of inputs from shopping precinct, schools, and various other businesses. And I think safety is of the utmost importance here, and a crossing will ensure the safety of everyone, both drivers and pedestrians.
Thank you. Does somebody else want to speak to this? Councillor Burns?
Thank you, Mayor. Totally agree with what the other two members are saying in regard to safety, that we should have a signalised pedestrian crossing. My concern is that this is on a road that's owned by the state government, and that council had to pay for the crossing to be put in place. And I can understand the Department of Infrastructure and Transport being more than happy for approving where council again are paying for the signalisation. It's required for the ambulances to drive out on the road. Yes, there are benefits for people crossing the road. However, I just would like to have seen some contribution by the Department of Infrastructure and Transport in this, not just everything have to be paid by the council when they get some benefit out of this. So I would love to have seen them say, look, we'll pay for this given the amount of money that council's already paid on this. I think it's just very one-sided.
Thank you, Councillor Burns. I know that the CEO has been trying to get in touch with the Department of Transport and Infrastructure, John Whedon. Do you want to speak to this?
Yeah, I guess firstly, if I can through the Mayor, just to clarify, Councillor Burns, SA Health have paid for all the signalisation for the ambulance service. All the signalisation that's currently in is paid for by SA Health or state government. This is a completely different pedestrian crossing, which is further down, further towards Audi for pedestrians. This has nothing to do with the ambulance station lights. It's a are correct in that this is an operating cost because it's not our road, it is a DIT road, but they're two separate crossings. So they have covered the requirements for the signalisation for the ambulance. We're not covering any of those costs. This is purely for pedestrian access across Adelaide Road.
There'll be two sets of signals on that road.
One is triggered by the ambulance and purely just for ambulances, nothing to do with traffic, pedestrians at all. It's purely when the ambulance needs to get out. The one further down towards Audi is a push button green person walking across the road, pedestrian crossing.
But there will be two sets so cars could stop, let people across, go a little bit further and then have to wait while an ambulance.
They will be timed. You can't, if the ambulance lights are going off, then the other ones will not work.
Okay.
Councillor Karimba.
Thank you, Mayor. I have no issue with crossings. I think it's a good idea. My issue is with the whole planning of and the quotation or the costing of this project. We're now coming back with a 15% increase on the initial budget. My question is more about why is it that it seems to be a regular occurrence that we can't budget or quote, and I'm speaking as a builder. If I kept doing this, I'd be out of business. So I'm just wondering, why is it we constantly are coming back for additions? Is there something to do with the way we estimate the job? Are we underscoping the job? Where is the failure? Because I wonder, and obviously this isn't something that would go ahead irrespective, but there have been other projects that I've found that had the true initial cost been correct, I really question whether the elected body would actually supported it. And it just seems to be a worrying trend when it comes to this.
I'll ask Jodie to respond to that. Councillor Karimba.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, we did actually have an initial quote from the builder when it came to council the first time. The increase in cost is their remobilisation because they've demobilised as part of the ambulance works, and now the design is complete. They actually need to remobilise.
Okay, wasn't that part of the quote though? That would have been foreshadowed when you actually did the scope of works.
Through the Mayor, no, they were anticipating that they were going to do the work at the same time as the ambulance station.
Okay, so there was no actual caveat in the contract there that said that this is the price fixed, you know, because what happens if this came back at say 200,000, would we be then up for $200,000?
It would come back to the chamber, Councillor Karimba. And
Yeah,
the chamber
I
would
understand
make a
it come
decision.
back to the chamber. What I'm asking is that we seem to be doing this quite regularly. All I'm asking for is to maybe be a little bit tighter when it comes to spending ratepayer funds. I would like to see an initial cost, maybe even possibly a contract that says there will be any extra added cost will be that part of the builder. They would have a contingency within their scope, which would allow for this. And instead of just constantly coming back, it's almost like death by 1,000 cuts when it comes to our budget. We keep just 50,000 here, 60,000 there. It just gets bigger and bigger. The deficit gets bigger and bigger. And I'm just wondering where this is going to all end up.
Thank you, Councillor Karimba. Was that a rhetorical question or did you want me to ask
No,
something?
it was a rhetorical question.
Does anybody else? Councillor Kemp.
I guess the question is around the last statements from the manager of infrastructure. If this is about mobilisation of 50,000 to get them back again, why couldn't they have done it when they're here? We had the money.
Through the Mayor, it was the design time with getting DIT's approval.
We should have incorporated in the ambulance lights. Would have been cheaper.
Any further discussion? Councillor Schiller, did you want to close the debate? No, I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. Minutes of the Audit and Risk Committee. Those are two recommendations: to receive and note the minutes and receive and note the meeting summary. I'll do them on block. Moving that way, Councillor Kemp. Seconding, Councillor Burns. Any questions or anyone want to say? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Minutes of 13.2, minutes of the Disability Access and Inclusion Advisory Committee from the 6th of February. The recommendation is receiving and noting the minutes, and that council also endorse proceeding to an expression of interest process for the recruitment of somebody, a community representative for the committee, and a report being coming back to council to consider and appoint the community representative. You're going to move that way, Councillor Schiller? Seconding that, Councillor Henderson. Do either of you want to speak to that? Councillor Schiller?
First motion, there's no complication with receiving and noting. I'd like to thank Emiko, who was our committee member who has resigned. And I think it's really important that we go out and seek a new committee member to fill this position, because it's a way that community can have their say and bring it to council. So it'd be great to get that extra spots filled.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. Councillor Henderson, did you want to speak to it? Does anybody want to speak to it? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now come to 14.1, the Victor Harbour Horse Tram Authority December Budget Review. Recommendation is that council receive a note. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you, Councillor Schofield, and seconded by, thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. Does anybody want to speak to that, Councillor Schofield? No. Councillor Mann?
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. I know Councillor Schofield and I had a bit of a discussion about this the other month, but it'd be interesting to see if there's any reporting around the conversion of people who go on the horse tram to then going to the VIP centre or vice versa, just to see if, because I guess my perspective is I think there's probably the horse tram is the best way to advertise the VIP centre, so it'd be good to see if there is a crossover, or see if that's an area where it's being actively pumped or used, or whether there's room for that to be considered more. So I guess that's the only thing I had to raise.
Yeah, perhaps we could ask, as Karen, you're involved? If Karen can pass that on and get that information, perhaps put it in the elected member update. Thank you. Any further discussion? Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor. Again, happy to receive noted. I think the Horse Tram Authority have done a really good job this year in improving their revenue. I will support this. I just wish, again, to be noted that I think that the contribution by council should be decreased proportional to the significant increase they're making in revenue. That's my only comment. I think they need to get eventually to be fairly self-sufficient. Not saying that we don't provide some contribution to them, but the amount, given all their good work, I just would like to actually see that we can save some money to reuse it in other areas of council, rather than we keep giving the same amount each year.
Thank you, Councillor Burns. Any further discussion? Okay, so I'll put that recommendation to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. We now come to matters of urgency, the Cudmore Road footpath. And we have two recommendations there. The first being that the footpath be realigned. And the second one is that council retain the design. If somebody would like to move one of them, Councillor Kemp.
I move number one.
Number one, that the Cudmore Road footpath be realigned and constructed in alignment with the curb opposite properties 65 and 67, then extended diagonally across the verge opposite 69 to connect to the existing footpath at 71 Cudmore Road. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Schiller. Would either of you like to speak to that? Councillor Kemp?
Yes, I would. I believe there are some pictures that we can actually show some issues around what we're talking about. What you see here, they've already laid some concrete already down. That's house 63. What they've dug out now, which is close to the curb, just off, is house 65. So because of the hedges and plus also trees at 63. As we move down, you can see they now come across diagonally across property 67 or the verge of 67. As you can see, it's a bit hard to see from this distance, but they've raised the level of the dirt and rolled it to be compacted to make it level, which is around about 6 inches or 150 mils. If you put 4 inches of concrete on top of that, again, that's around about 250 mils or 10 inches in height, which is a bit of a step hazard if someone stepped off it or fell off it or something like that, because it is a safety issue. The idea is common sense is to realign it through along the curbing. Go to the next one, please. And connect just by the Stobie pole there, which is 1.6 metres from the curb, and the footpath's only 1.5, and then go diagonally across the lawn down to house number 71. So you can see that this is a common sense approach to keep it all aligned and keep it safe because of the height of the footpath opposite 667, which to me is a bit of a dangerous area. And also if you lay the concrete footpath against the curb, it's less levelling you have to do because it won't be so high. So let the members, if you've got any questions, because I went there and had a look, but so that's the proposal, is the reason why we would do it for that reason also.
Thank you. Councillor Schiller.
This is a really curly road. The whole footpath's been quite hard to get that balance between good access and I'm sort of going against the grain a bit by stating that I've gone out and looked at number 67 and I've spoken to the lady who lives in 67 and she's quite concerned about water coming into her property. And I feel because we've only got 2 properties that are going to be affected with this curbside, the curbside footpath, there's already, as mentioned before, number 63 has that curbside curbing because of the tree. We've only got 2 homes that will be in that sort of configuration, and that 69, as I'm aware, are quite happy to have the sort of S-bendy effect going from front to back. Like I say, it's going against what we need in an ideal world, but for the sake of the people in 67, I think we should go for the curbside option on those 2 homes. I don't believe that there is grounds for that in other parts. This is because of the slope of that particular block that I'm concerned about. So that's why I'm heading that way at this point in time.
Thank you, Councillor Schiller. Does anybody else want to speak to this? Councillor Karembo.
Thanks. Yeah, I just went and saw the owner of the property and they're happy for this. Makes sense to go hard up against the curb. You would also miss the services that you can see in that picture if you did the original plan council had. I just got a question for Jody, if she could. One of the biggest issues in that whole area is flooding, and it doesn't. When I drove back up Cudmore Road, there doesn't seem to be any stormwater interception or drainage there at all. Is there any stormwater in that area that we could possibly put a I don't know what they're called, like a diversion or something, or a side drain that would at least catch half the water running down that hill, and then, you know, currently it floods properties?
Thank you. Through the Mayor, no, there's no underground stormwater in that area. As mentioned in the report, we have done some work already to try and prevent water from overtopping the curb. by redirecting the property owner's own roof stormwater out into the street. And also we did offer to change the curb to a barrier curb to prevent the overtopping. That wasn't an option that was recommended by the property owner, and also did provide some recommendation that they could change their driveway to stop water flowing into their property.
Right, okay, thanks.
Any further discussion in relation to this item? No. Councillor Kemp, do you want to close the debate?
I think this is a common sense approach that we should approve this. In a realistic world, actually at the moment, there's only one property that's really affected because 65 is actually near the curb anyway, majority of the way, and it just deviates at the end. So I think it's only one rural property. And I think we have to take each property on a case-by-case basis, depending on the circumstance and the issues that arise. It's easy to put a resolution there. It's also pretty easy to get a plan to look at it, but you don't know what it looks like until you start constructing and see what the finished product is. And that's, in this case, is the problem. I think the owner, Mrs. Broadbent, felt, looked pretty good on paper, but when they actually started to dig it and roll it, found out it didn't look as what it was supposed to be, or how it looked on paper. So I think the best idea is to continue along the curbway to connect up to the lawn and then diagonally across to number 71. And I think at this stage, I've talked to some of the neighbours, they're quite happy to put the bin not on the footpath at all at any stage, because the arm of the rubbish truck can actually reach out and grab the bin and put it back as well. So I think that's a good indication. But again, it's a case-by-case basis, and this is one needs this to be done the way we put it. Thank you.
Thank you. That closes the debate. I'll now put that to the floor. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. There are no questions on notice. Are there questions without notice? Councillor Karemba.
Just a question, and it was I believe it was in the Friday update. The FRAWA have come with a review or an update of their budget. They're talking about potentially opening a loan of 2.2 million over a 7-year period. I would have to assume this will all come to the chamber for approval, won't it? And just noting, because I guess what, sort of picked my eyes up was that it says here that the loan facility open for finance of the ACM project will also used to fund other approved capital expenditure items. Can we find out if the actual facility was opened only for the ACM project? Was the original reason for the loan, the original loan?
Through the Mayor, I believe it was, and yes, that is coming to the March meeting. I've actually only received that confirmation from Simon Grenfell, the Executive Officer, for it to be presented to the council. It needs to go to all of the constituent councils to enable them to open up that facility or extend that facility. But clarification on your second question, I'll get confirmation of that.
And just if you could follow up on that first part of the first question, which was if the loan was open specifically for the ACM project, but here as identified has been used for other capital expenditure items, has that come back to, or at some stage did that come back to the chamber to allow them to do that?
So they did recently come to the chamber for another capital expenditure, which was the purchase of a new truck for the truck that was damaged or actually written off from the Ankalilla accident. So any extensions to their loan facilities does have to come to the constituent councils, but once they actually have the facility, they can utilise it for other things. But I will get clarification on the first part in terms of if it was specifically opened for the ACM project.
Great, thank you.
Are there any other questions without notice? Councillor Quinton.
Just seeking an update. Probably going to have to come from state government, but just about what's the plan for the crossing at the Grantley Avenue High Marsh Road railway intersection there, where at the moment there's no right turn there.
I think we're waiting for Steam Ranger to do something there, but I'll check with Jodie.
Yeah, thanks. Through the Mayor, there was a motion to council, I think in 2022, to help fund the design of that crossing, which council didn't back up. So it's with Steam Ranger for them to do the design.
Are there any other questions? No, there are no motions on notice. Motions without notice. No motions without notice. Councillor Crember, you said you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just got a personal statement, and if I could have this minuted, please. I'd like to acknowledge the Ombudsman's findings for ASO reference 2024/04458, that on the 21st of July, a disclosure I made to elected members of the Chamber of the City of Victor Harbor would likely amount to a breach of section 624A and B of the integrity provisions of the Local Government Act.
Thank you, councillor Crember. You'll need to move a motion for that to be put in the minutes.
I'll move a motion for that to be put in the minutes.
Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, councillor Kemp. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried, thank you. We now move on to confidential items. And the first recommendation is that we go into confidence because the principle that the meeting be conducted in a place open to the public has been outweighed in the circumstances because the matter involves development-related compliance issues and the potential negotiation of civil penalties under the Planning, Development and Infrastructure Act. Someone like to move that way? Thank you, councillor Henderson, and seconded, please. Councillor Kemp. Thank you. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you very much, gallery.